2 a.m. Your doorbell rings. It is the secret police. They show an open order to do whatever they want. They take you to the headquarters for a short clarification. That's what they tell your family. But this is a lie. You won't see them for years. If ever. This is an average Tuesday night in countries of the Eastern Bloc during the 1950s. I read a lot of personal stories about the unjust arrests, the dehumanization of the process, and how anyone could easily become a target. I wanted to know if history ever served justice to the victims, if the agents ever had to face court, or if they just got away with their politically charged, brutal actions. While looking for an answer, I discovered more and more issues I had to clarify. The unfolding picture became this video. So, let's dig in. Did you notice? In the story, I said the agents showed an official document. The problem was that the document was issued by the secret police. The organization was controlled exclusively by the ruling party. From a strictly constitutional or civil rights perspective, these operations were entirely illegal, but they were legalized through a series of hollow decrees. Here is a blueprint of a typical open order. The document has a serial number. There is a statement that the power of the organization is vested by the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers was a government-like body. And under this power, the organization authorizes the agents to do whatever they want. These orders didn't even have the victim's name on them. They were sometimes just blank forms the agents carried to fill in on the spot. This made it very clear that anybody could have been a target. The law served the dictatorship, so it was pointless to raise legal concerns about the lawlessness of these orders. But interestingly, the agents tried hard to look as legal as possible. It wasn't for the victim, it was for the international stage and to keep the lower level agents from feeling like common criminals. First of all, they aimed to avoid violent scenes. They lured their target to the headquarters with the promise that it was only to clarify the case and would take a few hours only. Then it was also part of their tactic that they claimed they were investigating a crime. This was a forged excuse, but it gave the targeted individual a false sense of safety. Since the individual was innocent regarding the crime in question, they remained cooperative and calm. They let the agents in, let them look around, and agreed to go with the agents to the headquarters. It is very hard to find first-hand accounts of such visits. Not just because the agents took the diaries, but also because the families burned every document after such a visit, or before. Like in the case of Tibor Kranz. Home searches aimed to find Western anti-communist literature had become common. Frightened, my mother had decided to burn my diary. Wolfgang Kinkelday, an electrician, was arrested by the Stasi on 11 December 1976 at his home in Jena and imprisoned in Berlin-Hohenschönhausen. He describes what happened after he opened the door at 7:30 on the morning of his arrest. 3 characters are standing outside. You are Herr Hinkelday? Yes. Get dressed. You are coming with us to clear something up. That is how it is. How often I have gone through this moment in my mind. It still frightens me now. I get dressed. A Stasi official stays in the flat. The other 2 take me out to a car. In front is the driver, with me in the middle behind him. My last journey through Jena ends at the Stasi building, am Anger. I have to wait. A young man watches me over his Neues Deutschland. Then they put handcuffs on me. I'm driven away again in a car and taken to the State Security Regional Headquarters in Gera. A knock on the door, they ask your name, and they just take you away in handcuffs. People learn to rather not say anything. I read a book by a sociologist who made field studies in villages in the 1970s in East Germany. She was interviewing an old farmer when a sudden twist happened. He goes on, the formerly rich former clique look down on others, hold themselves high. I ask who the formerly rich clique is, and he goes berserk. Oh no, I won't go there. I'm an old man, I don't have any children. I don't want trouble. He says, someone must have sent me. He's afraid. I don't want to hear someone ringing at the doorbell at night. Notice this last comment, at night. By striking between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., agents across the Eastern Bloc ensured the victim was in a state of deep sleep. The victim got confused by the sudden situation and became more likely to confess or comply under pressure. Furthermore, the night provided a cloak of invisibility that prevented large-scale public resistance. It doesn't mean the neighbors were sleeping. They woke up as the agents slammed their car doors and stomped with their boots. They terrorized the neighbors into a state of atomized fear. This ensured that while the whole street knew someone had been taken, the disappearance remained a private, terrifying mystery that broke social solidarity. But let's stop for a second. Were they really targeting innocent people? The answer is, in theory, no. But in reality, they often just wanted to reach a quota or perform preventive repression. Wolfgang Kinkeldey, the discussed electrician, was imprisoned in Berlin-Hohenschönhausen. Proceedings were initiated against him for incitement hostile to the state and for forming associations hostile to the state. These accusations were always vague, and it was easy to find something that classified as hostile to the state. Still, someone had to find that evidence. Secret police agents across Eastern Europe all followed the Soviet KGB's playbook. They obtained a 360-degree view of an individual's life, monitoring where they lived, worked, and prayed without any judicial oversight. In an era without computers, this was accomplished by a network of informers. Well, informers were easy to find. They accused the desired individual of some crime and made a compromise. If the individual operated as an informer, they wouldn't press charges. That was the deal. East Germany built the most dense network of informers. The ratio of full-time Secret Service personnel to population was 1 to 180. That means for every 180 citizens, there was one full-time agent. Not even the Soviet Union was this strict. There, the ratio was 1 to 1,565. In East Germany, the number of political arrests was extremely high, even for their administration. In December 1961, Minister for State Security Erich Mielke had to curb the wave of arrests. A large number of the recently condemned political offenders were soon released, and Mielke announced before his ministry's top brass, "It is not possible to keep up the present high number of arrests." But this didn't change much. I found an interesting part in a book about the Stasi. In 1988, the MFS carried out 19,169 such cases. Of some 8,000 which were concluded, 87.5% failed to produce evidence of undesirable attitudes or actions. 4% formed the basis for the recruitment as an informer, and 8.5% was an actual criminal. The regimes of the Eastern Bloc gave some pretext for these notorious arrests. The Soviets defeated Nazi Germany and its allies, so under Soviet rule it was still relevant to persecute the remnants of the fascist and Nazi past. Another common communication formula was hunting down the tools of the CIA or of the Vatican. The alleged Western agents were blamed for economic hardship, which was actually caused by bad governance. and some segment of the population believed this explanation. The true reason behind the harassment and arrests was purely political. The regimes of the Soviet satellite states wanted to keep society in check. The atmosphere of terror, the damaged social solidarity, and the blame served one thing: to prevent unrest against the controversial regime. The individuals they targeted either had relatives in Western Europe or had made negative comments about the Communist Party. But the paranoia of the system was so high that at some point they also targeted individuals who simply weren't vocal supporters of the regime. I found it really interesting that we are discussing serious injustice here. Harassment for nothing, mistaken accusation which still led to imprisonment, children taken away. But the secret police didn't struggle to find staff in any of the Soviet satellite states. Were these agents serving the regime for personal benefits? Or were they convinced they were fighting a good fight? Who were they? The first bit I found about these agents was chilling, as the critique came from their boss in East Germany, 1962. Minister for State Security Erich Mielke said this at a conference. A number of comrades need to change some things about their way of thinking. These comrades think that the organs of state security have a privileged position, that they are not a part of the state apparatus but are themselves an organ of the party. This is wrong. Note the privileged position in the speech. The work of the agents was honored by the party with above average pay and other privileges such as the ability to purchase Western goods with East German currency. And obviously, this attracted individuals from the peripheries. The apparatus was led by a small group comprised of old communist underground fighters, along with the mass of employees made up of extremely young men from socially underprivileged families with a markedly low education. These young men hated and despised the townspeople. Any action they had to take, they did without hesitation. But if you think about this twice, you might ask, how did they learn the craft? People with a low level of education, equipped with guns and privileges, would lead to chaos, right? Well, this was the point where I remembered something I learned in high school. The dark secret of the secret police of the Eastern Bloc countries. When I was a schoolboy, our teacher took us to the House of Terror Museum in Budapest. It has a room called Changing Clothes. In the middle of the room there is a Nazi and communist uniform. The brochure said, in a telling sign of the affinity between Nazism and communism, the communists welcomed into their ranks those in the Arrow Cross rank. That was the Nazi party in Hungary. And while who showed a willingness to cooperate, they continued to serve, doing the same job as before, terrorizing, humiliating, torturing, and killing. In the words of Mátyás Rákosi, communist dictator of Hungary in the 1950s, unfortunately, sometimes fascists have slipped into our party. But this was the case everywhere else, in Bulgaria, East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. Their presence in the ranks is way more problematic from a practical perspective, even though the moral aspect is also bad enough. Secret police officers serving the Axis during World War II operated under wartime conditions. In war, a civilian life carries a different price tag than it does in peace, and the stakes are entirely different. Despite serving horrific regimes, their work was seen as existential, preventing sabotage, conspiracy, and agitation that was a matter of national survival. Their actions were decisive for the fate of the regime. This stands in stark contrast to the agents of the Soviet era when there was no war. While these regimes feared uprisings, A country at peace can endure far more internal disturbance than one at war. Yet, the rehired fascists and Nazis brought that zero-sum wartime mindset with them. They treated every suspect like a wartime saboteur, making their operations unnecessarily brutal. Another consequence of their presence was a competition among agents. Former Nazis tried to prove their skills and new loyalty, and agents of the new generation tried to do the same. So, as a result, citizens of a peacetime state were prone to eager agents fighting a war against enemies they imagined. The public was terrified and the resentment grew and accumulated. All these discoveries in this topic just added weight to my initial question. Did these agents and their masters ever face consequences? I tried hard to collect all the consequences the agents had to face. Here is what I found. The headquarters of the Communist Party of Hungary was at Republic Square in Budapest. When an uprising started in 1956, the secret police was defending the party headquarters. Rebels succeeded and lynched several officers, famously hanging some by their feet and pinning their pay books to their corpses to highlight their status as mercenaries of the regime. In 1989, during the Romanian Revolution, the Securitate remained loyal to Nicolae Ceausescu longer than the regular army. This led to street battles where civilians and soldiers hunted for Securitate terrorists. In January 1990, thousands of citizens stormed the Stasi headquarters in Berlin. While this was largely non-violent compared to Hungary, the consequence was the physical seizure of the archives. Citizens literally stopped the agents from shredding evidence of their crimes. And the list ends here. Do you remember that mother who burned the diary of her son to protect him? When the regimes of the Soviet satellite states fell, their secret police destroyed as much evidence of their crimes as possible. This was one reason the agents never had to face court. The other reason was the nature of the regime change. It was, in most cases, consensual. They made various deals. In most cases, the democratic youth was happy enough to achieve a civilized transition in return for not holding trials. This is where I hit a hard wall. I went looking for trial records. I looked for names of agents who served time. But the deeper I dug into the transition of 1989, the more I realized that the justice I was looking for was never part of the deal. The negotiations and deals made in 1988-89 are about as opaque or clear as mud as the people who made them. Some of them are renowned politicians still in the game, not very keen to share what they really know. The victims of the agents have mostly passed away, as have most of the agents. The relevance of this pit of history is less and less, until history repeats itself somewhere else. This is the History Rabbit Hole's channel. I make videos about my journey through various topics in history. My name is István. I studied history, geography and global history. And whenever I hear a question about history, I dig deep, and from the good stuff I make videos. So don't miss out on the next one. Subscribe and thanks for watching.